Good morning. We are back from recess and the time is 9 o'clock. Today is Thursday, May 25th, 2016, and this is day 2 of the Physical Therapy Board of California board meeting. We are meeting in the Department of Consumer Affairs hearing room located at 2005 Evergreen Street in Sacramento. Can we please have roll call?
Katarina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Rabena Imen. Here. Deborah Alviso.
Here.
Jesus Dominguez.
Present.
Daniel Drummer.
Here.
Tanya McMillian.
Here.
TJ Watkins.
Yeah.
All members are present with the exception of Katarina Ellaby, and the board has a quorum.
Thank you. Today, let's start with agenda item number 17. And we'll begin with the Department of Consumer Affairs this morning.
Good morning, Physical Therapy Board. My name is Dean Rafilo. I'm the 2-month director of Department of Consumer Affairs. Absolutely appreciate Executive Officer Kaiser and Vice President Rabena Amen allowing me to briefly address today's board. Honored to be appointed by Governor Brown. As I mentioned, it's been 2 months since first started. Absolutely, it's been an enjoyable 2 months. Learning the diversity of issues under DCA, obviously meeting folks like yourselves and executive officer like Mr. Kaiser, eye-opening experience going into this. Naturally, I was somewhat aware of the breadth of DCA. You may know that I was once a commissioner for the Athletic Commission. I have fond memories coming to this building. I was just telling Christine Lawley, one of the most fond memories I have of being a commissioner was I was able to give a pension check to an ex-boxer. Very difficult to find ex-boxers, as you can imagine, but I will always cherish that memory. Prior to coming to the board, my work was primarily in the California State Assembly. I was chief of staff for 2 different members, a legislative assistant for a different one, and when I was chief of staff for Assembly member, in between being chief of staff, I was also a lobbyist for the California Medical Association. And while there, I was the liaison to the Medical Board of California. Long way for me to say, when I was doing my stint on the commission, when I was doing my stint as the liaison to the Medical Board, I should have paid a little bit more attention because naturally, unbeknownst to me, in forward a few more years, I'd be the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Like you, I share a deep, sincere-rooted interest in protecting Californians, specific to obviously consumer protections, my understanding, and I'd love to hear more and learn more about what this board has been doing specific to protecting licensees, protecting obviously patients specific to physical therapy, and I look forward to hopefully meeting with you more, learning more about obviously the profession, the issues that are on the front burner for this board. Congratulations on, as I understand, it was a smooth sailing sunset review that you had this year. As you know, unfortunately not all go as smoothly, but hopefully there are going to be opportunities in which the other boards can learn from the PT board, and specific to how to master getting through a successful sunset hearing. And to the extent I can, I'd love to be helpful in your efforts, whether it's future sunset hearings, again, whether it's specific issues on your front burner. My approach to this work is one where I'm going to try to truly understand the issues from all different sides, perspectives, ask as many folks as possible who have the insight and expertise, much like yourselves, specific to the issue. In doing that, I hope when it comes to decision-making time, I'll have the confidence in the decision given the deliberate process that I've taken towards making the decision. I know you folks have a very busy agenda. My understanding yesterday went long. In no way do I want to deter a smooth day today. So again, thank you for allowing me to quickly address this board. Look forward to exploring more opportunities in which we're able to do so, and I'm happy to answer any questions as I've told other boards and executive officers, please keep in mind that I'm only prepared to probably answer 2-month questions as opposed to 2-year questions.
Any questions this morning? Thank you very much for taking the time to come out to our first board meeting since you've been appointed. And welcome aboard.
I think it is important to acknowledge your willingness to come out at the 2-month level.
Yes.
And then I can speak for staff that we'd appreciate you coming in and meeting staff. We have a all-staff meeting second week of June, and we extend the invitation.
Thank you so much. I know that we were able to speak briefly maybe a week and a half ago. It is those exact kind of things that I'm interested in investing in. And I failed to mention I used to be an organizer, and in my mind there's no better way to embark on any kind of endeavor other than putting in the time for those kind of things. So barring anything that I have on my 2.5-month calendar, I'll be sure to make it.
We will reschedule around you.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay, and since we are on item 17, and I see that we have a representative from CPTA, is there any report that CPTA would like to give this morning?
Good morning, Tamika Island with the California Physical Therapy Association. Good morning to the board members, executive officer, as well as PTPC staff. Nothing new to report at this time. Just wanted to remind you all that, excuse me, we will be holding our, excuse me, annual conference September 16th and 17th in San Diego, California. We welcome you to attend and participate if you're able. And if you have any questions for us, I'd be happy to entertain them at this time.
Any questions or comments? Jason?
We are definitely planning on coming in September. We got our Sunday
Excellent.
best on. We got a new booth.
Wonderful.
So we plan on showing in force.
We would be happy to see you there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you too. I'm glad to hear that. That's great that we're planning on going. Okay, so let's move back into the order of the agenda and look at agenda item 6, reviewing and approving previous meeting minutes.
Okay, so on page 10 of the meeting materials, I'll go through page by page and ask the board if they have any amendments to the draft meeting minutes. So page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13.
I have one question, and it's under agenda item 11, probably about line 138. The statement is something like that the clinic would not be able to be insured, and it's really that they couldn't be an approved provider for that insurer, as opposed to the clinic being insured.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a little comment, modified language for clarity. I got the same.
Don't forget the microphone. Thank you.
Sorry, I had the same comment. I had a little note, sticky note said modified language for clarity on that same line 138.
The clinic would not be approved as a provider by that insurance company.
Yeah, the individual or clinic.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay.
Okay. Any additional edits on page 13? Page 14? Page 15?
On page, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
No, sorry.
On page 15, down at line 249, when I first saw this, I was thinking that it might be an incomplete reporting, but if I remember right, we discussed certain things, and then it was almost like we needed more information. So I don't think there were any decisions or anything made on this date.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, were there any edits on page 16? Page 17? And page 18? Okay, moving on to the October 25th meeting minutes.
Should we take them a set at a time for approval?
That's completely up to the board. If you'd like to make a motion to approve the August minutes, and then we'll make a motion for November and then so forth.
So we need a motion.
Yes.
I move to approve the August minutes.
I second
As amended with that correction that
As amended.
Dr. Alviso pointed out.
Thank you.
Roll call.
Katerina Ellaby, is that
I'm
it?
sorry, before you begin, any more board discussion about the August minutes? Any public comment? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Katerina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Bennett Amen.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
it. Yes.
Tanya McMillan.
Yes.
TJ Watkins.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the October 25th minutes. Are there any revisions to page 19? Page 20? Page 21?
Brooke, on page 20, down near the bottom, about line 73. Trying to make sure I make sense out of my own note. In that, it looks as though we just requested additional drafts of proposed revisions. I think I want to make sure, thought it was at this meeting that we discussed that we would either be looking at being under the recently passed retired status statute or having the authority to draft regulation. And is that captured well enough with requested additional drafts of proposed revisions?
No, I think that the clarity should be made. So, where we mentioned higher up in the paragraph that we presented the proposed hybrid statutory language, and then we had further discussion regarding that, I think the two alternatives that came from that conversation should be spelled out a little bit more clearly. That the board requested additional drafts of proposed revisions, and then you could say to include that either adopting the newly enacted general provision for retired status affecting the whole department, or whether or not we were going to make a change to the existing retirement status within the practice side. We can make that clarity.
Does that capture your thoughts, Stephanie?
Yeah, and the other one of just, you may have just said this, sorry, I might have gotten behind you, the clarifying of the authority to even set out the regulations, if that was the direction that we also discussed.
Okay, any edits on page 21?
Do we need to kind of come up with a phrase that's going to be put in there, if it's going to be an edit?
I think that would be a good idea, just so we're clear.
Maybe these additional drafts would include exploring what's it called, to remove our statute so that we would be under that one, or clarifying our authority, our statute, and the authority to draft additional regulation.
Right, so it'd be a repeal.
Repeal. Thank you. Couldn't
Yeah.
think of the words.
Repeal of the board's statutory retired license authority.
Or clarifying it to allow regulation to be drafted.
So do you think you have it all in one piece?
Does anybody know the reference of the retired status? The recent one?
The general provision is in the 400s, I'll have to look it up, but I can plug those numbers in this sentence, but the board requested staff to provide additional draft language to address either utilizing the newly enacted general provision, plugged in number, and repeal the existing statutory authority, or to edit the existing statutory authority and plug in our number within the board's practice act.
To clarify it to allow the regulation, because I think we really were talking about going that direction.
For future consideration of regulation.
There you go.
I got it.
So, can you read back the proposed amendment to that section?
The one that Jason just read?
Would you like me to reread it?
Yeah.
The board requested staff to provide additional draft language to address either utilizing the newly enacted general provision, which I'll plug in the number when I look it up, and repeal the existing statutory authority within the board's practice act, again, plug in the number, or to edit the existing authority in the board's practice act for future consideration of regulation.
BPC 2648.7.
And since I brought this up, I would just want to ask if the other board members, if that's still in line with what you recall from that meeting.
I had excused myself, so I wasn't there.
The existing, or the new retired license status section is Business and Professions Code, section 464. That's the general one for all the boards.
The notes that I just found whether that the board discussed repealing the retired license statute in favor of pursuing regulatory language. And then my recall is that the motion, which is on the top of page 21 that relates to this topic, was specific to reject the Sunset Committee, our Sunset Committee's recommendation to pursue the regulatory route, and that the motion was actually to not include the retired license statute, but to pursue regulatory process instead. And
So it looks like the motion needs to be clarified.
and that council was, that Tara was going to be preparing options for us. That's the note that I have as to what my suggestions to changing minutes when we were planning to discuss this at these minutes at a previous meeting.
So on the next page, that motion at the top should probably be reworded.
Right, because the motion that I had made was not to request to revise the retired license statute in Sunset, but was rather to pursue regulatory process, to not include it into the statute, but to pursue regulatory process instead, which was what the vote was then. I do think, though, that Dr. Elisa, you captured the pieces of the discussion that would be located on the bottom of the current page 20 in our agenda book.
And I'm wondering if, it's not that I'm changing the motion, but I'm thinking that it may not have translated into what the minutes are saying here. So,
Right.
to include was it more, I'm wondering if we, although we thought that's the direction we were going to go, that we also recognized that there was going to be some conversations going whether we would possibly need to repeal, time things right for regulation. There was all that conversation, and I'm wondering if it should be that really what we decided at that time was to include the retired license issue in the Sunset Review report.
Correct. Yeah, because
That was really the decision.
right, the direction to me was come back with 3 more additional options for continued discussion at the next board meeting. So it wasn't that the motion was to move forward or revise regulations. It was we need more information, but you had decided to go ahead and include the issue, the retired license issue, in the Sunset Review report. But you wanted to continue to review exactly what the board's recommendation would be in the review report.
But I believe that was the meeting when we discussed it. We did not want to include the retired issue into legislative process. That we wanted to maintain it with regulatory process, so that it was going to be under board's authority to revise or modify should we need to in the future, rather than having it be legislated, which would require it going to both houses and the governor to be modified in the future.
And I think that we're still pretty much on the same page. I think the confusion is, while the agreement amongst the group and the consensus is that we're going to do it through the regulatory process, the existing statute that we have today may not have the authority, and so it might need to be edited or revised in some way, possibly repealed to get out of the way of the general provision, and we could utilize that as the authority for the regulation process. So there's still, even if we're going the regulatory route, there's still a potential that, or even a necessity at that point, that there'll still have to be some legislative change to what we have in language today.
And no, I very much appreciate that. I just, because of the nature of that discussion, I believe I recall what the motion that I made was, and that was to reject the committee's proposal of including it into the legislative process of sunset, and instead keep it as a regulatory issue for this board to work on. That overall, we were moving forward trying to decide where things might fit, as Jason just admitted, or just discussed. But I didn't feel when we were going to potentially be discussing these minutes at the November meeting, I believe it was, that motion, that what's written in the minutes necessarily reflected what we had discussed and decided, which was to reject the committee's recommendation and to pursue a slightly different path.
Correct. If you look at page 23, that was the language that was recommended. And that language to revise section 2648.7 and go down that path, that was rejected because the concern there was adding this many provisions to our retired license authority in statute would have made it more complicated for the board later.
Right.
So this language was rejected to reconsider the best path to resolve the statutory discrepancies between the new statute and the board's existing statute. So effectively, it was a rejection of the recommendation to revise the board's existing statute so that the board can consider additional options, but the board did agree to, including the issue itself.
Okay.
So before that motion that we're discussing, should there be a mention that 2648.7, the modifications of that were rejected? Because it is included in the minutes and it looks like, like we made edits to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably appropriate.
Okay. And then the motion wording was to reject the committee's recommendation for the retired status to be fully contained in statute, but to include the issue in the sunset review report. And explore other options.
So, how does this sound? The motion would be to reject the committee's recommendation to revise the board's retired license statute at Business and Professions Code section 2648.7, but include the retired license issue in the sunset review report.
Can I confuse things more?
If you don't, I'm going to.
I remember there was a principle that we would go the regulatory route. But at that point, we didn't have all the information, and we requested that there would be more options made available. And then those options were made available at the next meeting. That's where 2648.7 and all of those were actually rediscussed. And the follow-up on that meeting, that is where we actually made a decision on exactly what we would be accepting and what we would be rejecting from the options. Because I distinctly remember in the principal part of it that we would go the regulatory route as the foundation. That was like, let's proceed. That's what I remember with this particular motion. That we would proceed for asking for those options, but with the principle that we would go the regulatory route.
So does Tara's recommendation or recommended language sound okay with everyone, or do we still need to work on that? What do you think, Dr. Drummer?
I'm good with that suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Dominguez?
No, just agree.
Okay. Ms. McMillan? No? Ms. Alito?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So did you guys get that?
Okay, any other edits on page 21 of the October 25th meeting minutes? And then on page 22 are the proposed revisions to BPC 2653 that were included.
I have one small edit on page 20, extremely small, but line 139, it's actually service, educational testing service, and that makes a big difference. But that's the name of the company. Singular.
Thank you.
That's what's in the existing statute.
Okay.
So we can't actually change that.
Hope the company doesn't take offense. That's true. Yeah.
Can I make a motion?
Yes.
I'd like to move to adopt the October 25th, 2016 minutes.
As edited.
Is that
As edited.
As edited, thank you.
Second.
okay? Any further board discussion? Any public comment? Okay, hearing none. We'll call them.
Katarina Elby. Katarina Elby is absent. Alicia Benaimén.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillan.
Yes.
TJ Watkins.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the November 16th and 17th meeting minutes. Page 24. Page 25. Page 26. Page 27.
On line 159 and 171, my name is Ms. Gill.
Oh, my apologies. We'll go ahead and correct that. Thank you.
Are we on page 27?
Yes.
Yes.
Item 15, was there any anything to go under that item?
No outcomes came from that discussion topic, so there wasn't anything for us to record.
So was that actually reviewing the document? Did we have to do any, we didn't have to do any kind of an approval of it?
We come back to it later on into the same session of minutes and have our motions as a result of the sunset items themselves.
And so what's the 2602? What's that specific?
That is the extension, that's the statute that actually has our extension.
Okay. So, okay, but I wasn't clear what this was, so that's part of my questioning of it. So was this our review of the Sunset Review Report draft?
It was.
There weren't any substantial changes to it, nothing that we would need to note that isn't in some other
Right.
topic. So I think I would recommend just adding a sentence of that.
Okay. Any additional edits on page 27?
Line 176, motion failed. We don't have account included with that, as with other votes. I'm not sure if you need to capture that, but it's captured in all of the other votes.
We'll go ahead and include that. Any additional edits on page 28?
Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve with the corrections on Tanya's name.
Use the microphone, please. Thank you.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further board discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Katerina Ellaby. Katerina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Bennett-Amen.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillian.
Yes.
TJ Watkins.
Yes.
November 28th meeting minutes, page 29. Were there any edits? Page 30. Page 31.
Page 30, 169. There needs to be a comma after 16 through 17.
Any edits on page 31?
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I move to approve the November 28th, 2016 minutes.
A second.
Sorry, as edited with the addition of the comma.
And seconded by Mr. Watkins. Any further board discussion? Any public comment?
Katerina Ellaby. Katerina Ellaby is absent. Alicia Bennett-Amen.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillian.
Yes.
TJ Watkins.
Yes.
Thank you. moving on to the February 8th, 2017 meeting minutes on page 32. Were there any edits? Page 33.
I just have a comment at the bottom of page 33, line 75. We did have the presentation by Lori, but also it seemed that that was followed with kind of a mini presentation that included Gloria. I'm not sure that that needs to be captured or not, but that just caught my attention. Is it fine as is?
I think it's fine as it is, but in deference, I think including Gloria Castro as a co-presenter is just as fine.
Okay.
I think we should include it.
Include? Okay.
Okay. Page 34. Page 35. Page 36.
Okay, we have a motion to approve these minutes.
I move to approve.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Hold on a sec, is that a motion with the correction to add Gloria
With the
Castro?
correction.
I'll
Oh, add
second.
Gloria Castro.
Okay. Katerina Ellis is absent. Alicia Amen.
Yes.
Deborah Alviso.
Yes.
Jesus Dominguez.
Yes.
Daniel Drummer.
Yes.
Tanya McMillan.
Yes.
TJ Watkins.
Yes.
Okay, I think we got through all those minutes. Thank you, Brooke.
And we're all caught up.
We're all caught up. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item 7, President's Report, and looking at the adopted meeting calendar. We have 2017, and we are here in May. Any questions, concerns, comments?
I do. So we just had our faculty meeting 3 days ago, and as it turns out, my course that I direct, that's the first week of classes at USC, and I now, in the past, have been able to teach on Tuesdays. I'm now being asked to teach on Wednesdays. It is literally the first day of the class, so I'll see what I can do to sort of arrange that. I know we've already agreed to the calendar as is, so I'll report back probably by the end of next week.
Which date are you looking at?
Well, I would have to try and figure out how to free myself from the first day of my class on Wednesday, the 23rd. August, sorry. Our classes start on Monday, the 21st. The semester begins.
So something to consider. The August 23rd, 24th meeting is still here in Sacramento in this hearing room. And Aracelli's not in the room, so she can't really scold me right now. There is room at this point, if it's agreeable amongst the rest of the members, to at least consider rescheduling. So if you wanted to move the meeting to 16/17 or something like that, there's time to plan.
Well, exactly like that. That would be great. Because our August meetings, as luck would have it, hit on the first week of the semester.
Dr. Drummer, is that something you can do?
First up.
I'm in the process of checking
Checking.
calendar. One
Okay.
moment.
Okay, Mr. Watkins?
I'm good.
And I'm good.
I am too.
It would work.
It will work for Dr. Alviso.
It will work.
It will work.
Do we love you?
To avoid a potential scolding of the EO, do we want to check with staff first?
We will during the break.
Okay.
Because the only thing that I'm thinking is facilities. Maybe this room is booked by somebody else, but I have a backup to that even.
Since we're in agreement, does that need a motion? Or is that?
It would, if the board wouldn't mind providing me just a little bit of time to confirm
Sure.
before we make that motion, though.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'd like to thank my colleagues in anticipation.
Okay. Any further comment on 2017 calendar?
I would request that we add the CPTA annual conference to be held in San Diego on September 16th and 17th to the calendar, please.
I like that idea. Okay, any other comments for 2017? Okay, moving on to 2018. I do believe this is 2018's
Yeah,
calendar.
that would be my correction. It says 2017 on my copy.
Yes. My apologies for that.
Okay.
But it is 2018.
Yes, correct. The proposed 2018 meeting calendar.
If I can make a comment, I really like how in the real 2017 calendar, that the exam days are in green. And for visual purposes and being able to catch those, I think that would be great to have that on the 2018 calendar as well, instead of just the number being green.
That's absolutely the intent. I just don't have those dates yet. So once we get them incorporated from FSBT, we'll include them into the calendar.
So those are proposed dates? Those aren't set
The
dates?
17 are set
Mm-hmm.
because they set them 2 years in advance, and they haven't released the 2018 dates just yet.
So those are guesstimate dates?
Or are they carryovers from last
They're
year?
carryovers.
Okay. Okay, any other comments for 2018?
Let the beat down begin.
Other comments for 2018?
I'm sorry. I'm already looking ahead here. In anticipation of the high likelihood of me teaching on Wednesday the following year, I hate to call in my chips, but if that could be considered just moving it to the prior week, 15, 16.
And I just had a general comment. I don't have any schedule conflicts at this point, but I did look at our proposed meeting dates, and for instance, the February date is the same week as the President's holiday. In general, it's difficult for me because I don't get President's Day off. So that means I would, I would prefer those without President's Day. Also, the same thing happens, well, no, not in May, but it's the week before Memorial Day. So just some things to look at, I suppose. No recommendations at this time.
I'd like to make a note that in the actual calendar part of the 2018 calendar, it says February 21, 22 is highlighted in orange, but when you go down to the list, the date is February 8. So I'm not sure if we're contemplating a February 8, 7 and 8 meeting or 21, 22, which might resolve the President's Day.
And that's the same for all the dates that are at the bottom.
I think that was a carryover from our meeting at USC.
So we'll go ahead and update those dates at the bottom.
I just took a look at the American Physical Therapy Association website for looking at their calendar for 18. And the combined sections meeting is scheduled for the 21st to the 24th of February of 2018.
So might be a good idea to move. Are you suggesting that, or just to note it at the same time?
Just presents another factor in the consideration, as well as your comment about the week of President's Day weekend, or the week of President's Day.
And at this point, this early, do we decide the calendar, or are we just kind of starting to take shape?
Yeah, we're just, we're starting to plan for, so, but the combined section meeting I know is of special interest to a number of the members, so that is something to really take into consideration. In February, we are typically here in Sacramento. This last year is a little bit different with some kind of shuffling around of the schedule, so I think I can speak for myself and staff and say that we would be, happy to spend Valentine's Day with you guys. So there's definitely room to consider movement.
As well as looking at the August dates for the week before.
Thank you.
Okay, any further comment on 2018? Any public comment? Okay, hearing none.
Do we need to, were you able to get what you need about moving August, or do you want to come back to it later?
I still would like to come back to it. So preliminarily, I can give you an update and say it does look, thank you to Shelley Jones, that this room is booked for those 2 days, and that the HQ2 hearing room is booked for those 2 days, but the HQ1 hearing room currently is free. And then I'll just kind of clue you in on the alternate plan that I was thinking is that Sacramento State University has expressed an interest in hosting us as well. And so that may be an opportunity for us to at least accept that invitation and have a board meeting on their grounds in front of their students, and like we typically would when we travel abroad. So I'll look into that as well.
Okay. Any further discussion on the calendar? All right. So, we're ready to move on to agenda item number 9, Executive Officer's Report.
Of course. So if you have any questions, as members, if you have any questions about any of the information that's contained within the report provided, I'd be happy to answer. There are a couple things that I'd like to highlight. We were able to, Sarah Conley, the manager over the application licensing services unit, and I were able to attend CPTA Student Conclave this year in Fresno, which was a really good experience. We thank you for the invitation. Sarah carried a lot more weight than I did. She spoke to a crowd of 350, almost 400 students, and I only had to talk to a classroom of about 50. So she carried a lot more of the weight than I did. From that, though, we have had a number of requests of interest of having us come out to programs and provide the same presentation. So Mount St. Mary's, Loma Linda, and St. Augustine have all asked us to come and provide that same kind of presentation to them. And in the efforts of outreach, it's something that we've talked about we'll be doing. It's just sometimes hard to line up those invitations. So we'll do what we can for that. At the Student Conclave, we also exposed, kind of in an experiment setting, the first draft of what we're considering to be the new study guide for the California Law Exam. In fact, I even kind of bribed attendees that if they wanted it, they'd have to come to my class to get it. So it looks like we're getting some positive feedback from that. We intend on creating that document as a very electronic friendly PDF that is not only going to serve as a study guide for the California law exam, but really an essential reference for staff and for board members alike to use that is a little bit more tailored to us than, say, Westlaw or something like that. So cross-references, statutes that have reverse cross-references to regulations that are promulgated from them and that kind of thing. It's a lot of work, and putting it together, it will be a living document for a little while, if you will, because I'd like to take any feedback that people provide and incorporate it where we can. So,
Can I ask a question about that? Would it also be useful for licensees? If you had
absolutely.
questions, could we go to the website and look that specific item up and get our answer?
The applicant, even, and the licensee is the main demographic that we're catering to with that document.
Okay.
I mean, the idea is to deliver that information to them as easily as possible. It's very difficult to come to the website and be redirected to the Office of Administrative Law or Westlaw and not be a lawyer in training and not know how to navigate those waters. So we're trying to take that content and consider the audience and put it into a document that's as user-friendly as possible.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate the efforts to produce the synthesized document, having it all in one place. It was something that was there in the past, and then I understand with transition and things that happen, and trying to navigate the Westlaw pieces to come to a cohesive document or to get a thought process was very challenging. So having it all together where you can essentially flip back and forth through pages, and I know going to electronic version having the book is different, but having all of it in one place is going to make a big difference. In just a quick look at the draft that you provided to us, it seems to really just be all of the laws and regs in one place. And if we're going to call it a study document, if that's what we want it to be, I would like to see some sort of description or expansion to the reader to explain that this is what you're seeing. Or if the idea is to really make it a study document, to have a little bit more instructor kind of approach to these are some of the things that you might encounter, or these things, rather than just being what the law is, having a little bit more of a description so that the reader can understand what these pieces are. Because otherwise it's just trying to read regulation and legislation, and it's not an easy thing to do for the unexperienced.
You'll see that one of the things that's going to change from this first edition to the second edition is actually the dropping of the title study guide. And so it will be the laws and regulations that govern the profession of physical therapy. But I think we can address some of those concerns in other means through outreach, with tutorials for applicants and those kind of things. But for this particular document, it's not truly a study guide, if you will, anyway, because I don't really want to study to the exam, or I don't want to provide the roadmap to passing kind of thing. I really do want them to be exposed to anything that might affect their license at that point. So in this document, it is the Practice Act in its entirety, the CCR that affects this profession in its entirety, but for the other codes, the government codes, the corporation codes, the penal codes, the health and safety codes, the only information in this document does come from the exam. So to that extent, that part is the study guide. I really struggled with the idea of cutting up the Practice Act and the CCR to do that as a study guide, though. I really felt like we should still focus in on and at least keep that narrow window of Practice Act and CCR intact for the benefit of licensee members, staff alike to use as a reference document.
I very much appreciate that purist attitude.
Jason?
in your report under the update for vacancy, where it says is currently recruiting 4, is it 1 staff services analyst, or is it 2, or is it 8?
So, yeah, sometimes that's confusing. In state service, we don't get to deal with people in holes. So a .8 is somebody who can't work the full 40 hours a week. They can only work 4 days a week. So the .8 position that we have for the administrative services program won't be a full-time position. It's 8/10 of a position. And then there is a full-time position that we're recruiting for currently in the application services unit.
Well, in regard to your study guide, I want to thank you for putting that together. And I'm very interested in seeing in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, how having something like this available might improve our California law exam scores.
The idea, the product itself has been in the pipeline for quite a while as far as projects go. Really, at this point, kudos should really go to Brooke, because that kind of accelerated the timeline on her a little bit, especially for Student Conclave, and thinking that there's a small group that I could expose it to and get some feedback for as kind of a test run. And so, I might have come to her a little late in the game and said, I've changed my mind, I want this to be ready to print by. But she came through like a champ. So as the document moves forward and we start to create that more synthesized PDF version of the document, you might even look at seeing that delivered by different means. And so while it's a PDF and we can post it on the website and our social media, it would be nice if it was an app for a mobile device or something like that. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Thank you, Brooke. Okay, Jason, any other highlights in your report?
The only thing I think that kind of sticks out, well, there's 2 things. Animal rehabilitation, I attended the 3rd and final task force meeting, at which time the task force created a recommendation for the full veterinary medical board. I was not able to attend the veterinary medical board meeting to look or hear for that recommendation. I watched from afar, but I can tell you that they adopted the recommendation at their April 19, 2017 meeting and directed its staff and council to inform the legislature and explore the next steps of implementation and add it to the agenda for the next VMB meeting. So we're still on this side of the fence, still looking and waiting to see what happens as far as what the involvement will be for the PTVC. That recommendation mentions the Physical Therapy Board of California anytime that there are regulatory considerations. So when it came to training of an animal rehabilitationist, the legislature's intent was to have both boards work in cooperation to come up with that language. And when it came to having to promulgate regulations about locations and premises, it was also the legislature's intent to have both boards be involved in that promulgation. So,
Quick question. On the 3rd line from the bottom where it says veterinarian who established VCPR in a range setting, what is that?
So range setting is a very specific definition to veterinary medical board. It's anything that's outside of a clinic. So if you think about house calls, like house calls for a physician where they actually have to go out to a ranch or an equestrian facility, that would be considered a range setting.
Thank you.
The only other highlight past that is that we are still subject to audit by DCA's Internal Audits Office. I don't have or can share with you an anticipated completion to that audit or a result at this point. I don't know. So board continues to work with DCA's Internal Audits Unit and provide any kind of information that they might need. And until then, we will just wait and see.
Thank you. Any further board discussion on EL's report? Any public comment? Hearing none. Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify on the animal rehab task force meeting. The recommendation at the end of the meeting from the task force was to that there would be direct and immediate supervision over the physical therapist, and they did not agree to look into the premises permit for physical therapists on site. So we obviously remain concerned about the recommendations coming out of the task force, and just wanted to make sure that the board, the PT board, is updated, that it doesn't, at this point, it's looking like that's the direction that the veterinary board is moving in, and so we will need to continue as an association, because our position working on that. And so, but I just want to make sure that the board is aware that they did not, the recommendations from the task force were not accepted by the vet board, and the vet board came through with much different recommendations going forward.
It's a good thank you, Stacey. It's a good point of clarification. The recommendation from the task force was very much that the supervision should be determined by the veterinarian.
Right.
The veterinarian board in its entirety didn't agree with that portion and amended the recommendation to include direct supervision.
Direct supervision and no premises permit.
Thank you. And just for the record, can you please state your name?
Sorry, Stacey Defoe, Executive Director for the California Physical Therapy Association.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Any further public comment? Is it okay to just move right ahead, or
Well,
anything else?
before we conclude, Liz Constancio is not here today. She had to deal with some family matters, and I think I can speak again for myself and staff that our prayers are with her, and we're here to back her up. And so part of backing her up in that is I've moved her outreach report into my EO report. And so as an attachment on the very end of it, you'll see that the statistics for Facebook and the website are included there. And I will try as best I can to answer any questions you might have in that, keeping in mind that I haven't been really a part of that for a little bit of time. So.
Any board comment or discussion? Other than the obvious that there's been a pretty big decrease in views and hits.
Yeah, we're not as active. So the decrease that you're seeing in the website hits is the difference, at least in part, in how those hits are measured. And so we moved from an analytical software called Urchin to now we're using Google Analytics. And Google Analytics is a little bit more flexible. It provides a little bit more data. It gives us the ability to filter out the data we don't want and really focus in on the data that we do. And so we're still learning to use it a little bit, but it's definitely measured things different than what Urchin did. So it's more than just a coincidence that the numbers changed at the same time as the data sets changed. So I attribute it more to that than anything else.
And do you have any report on any new programs or areas where we are going to start trying to increase outreach efforts?
Definitely in the idea that with these new invitations to come out to schools and programs, that'll be something that we're going to use to also kind of in conjunction with the rest of the outreach program. The more students that we can see face-to-face, more graduating classes, the more opportunity we have to get them to engage with us in other ways, with social media and that kind of thing. So without committing or revealing too much, the idea of a mobile app and that kind of thing will also be something that we're considering for PTBC as far as reference materials, newsletters, documentation, sunset reports, all those kind of things centralized and very easy to deliver fashion, especially considering our audiences today. And then because of just vacancies and shifting of staff, I think you'll see at the next board meeting a significant improvement in performance for our Facebook and Twitter statistics, because we have or will be having more content delivery. And then with that also YouTube. So right when we start to get our sneakers on and start to take off on a run, there's always something that comes up and pulls those resources away. Outreach is almost always one of those things that gets hurt first. So.
Any other board discussion? Any anything on deck as far as reaching out to licensees?
As a result of the sunset review, we're kind of going into the next agenda item, but as a result of the sunset review, staff are starting to create different types of surveys that are not, so the survey that we reported in our sunset report is specific to a complainant and has the kind of misleading title of consumer satisfaction survey, when the only person that gets has an opportunity to fill it out is a complainant in the matter. So it's a small window, a small portion of people to be surveying. So we're going to create a couple other customer satisfaction surveys. Surveys particular to licensees, surveys particular to applicants, and so on. So as far as reaching out to licensees, they'll have an opportunity through website and through correspondence to go back to a SurveyMonkey and give us their feedback.
How about dissemination of information to licensees?
As a whole, yeah, strategically just planning for the future, kind of a whole overhaul of our website to make the information much more accessible. Starting probably with the applicants first, the application process, making the application much more informative. Downloading a PDF package that has everything that's particular to the application process instead of having to navigate page after page after page and dance around inside of our website to get the same content. So a lot of different streamlining, if you will.
Any information on a newsletter?
There is going to be a newsletter before the end of this year and then the early part of next year. The newsletter is kind of hard to time because right when we think we're ready to do a newsletter, whatever regulation or legislation we thought we would be reporting on is either too early or too late. So, but yes, absolutely in the works.
We had talked a while ago about the potential for an electronic version of the newsletter too, to doing some, because we're collecting email addresses, and there was discussion about the challenges with trying to do that with technology that we had a year ago or so. But being able to try to do some sort of a push newsletter to the licensees so that they could stay a little bit more current with information that was going on. Rather than having the licensee have to go to the website, which I know is a challenging thing.
The newsletters moving forward will be electronic. There will be obviously some printed copies for the use at outreach events and those kind of things, but the main delivery method will be electronic. And it will be an email push as well as a catered to. So they can come to the website and download a copy. We make it pretty easy. It's right on the very front home page. And there's a picture of it. So they just click that picture and that's the newsletter. But we also have plans to change that a little bit where it's, once they do open it, it's a different PDF style template and it's a little bit more navigatable. And then again, kind of mentioning that elusive, maybe never existing mobile app would actually also have newsletters included into it, and there'd be a library there. And within that mobile app would be push notifications, so anybody who has it could have that pushed to them. Hey, you got a new newsletter. The email address idea of an email blast is going to happen. I just want to temper expectations into what that looks like because I can't speak to the accuracy of the email addresses that I have on file. People tend to change their email addresses like they change their clothes. So what I might have on file now might be bounced back and undeliverable. So we'll do what we can to supplement that in correspondence with links back to it and that kind of thing, but to a certain extent, we are going to have to rely on them coming to look for it.
I would personally prefer an email.
Mhm.
So we get, the newsletter from FSBPT to email and in Petra, and without that email coming to me, I'm not going to look for it.
Sure.
But when it comes, I'll scan it, and ooh, that's interesting, and I'll click on that, or that's interesting, and so just personally,
Yeah.
the e-blast.
No, every email address that we have on file will receive it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue. Is one is I don't have an email address for every licensee,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second factor is I'm not sure that the email address I do have on file for the licensees that I have is accurate.
Right.
So
But if we've got even 30,000 correct email addresses and that word of mouth gets out to others, that's optimistic.
I would say that I might have a little over 10,000 email addresses.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And that 10,000 though represents 40%?
Yeah, absolutely.
40% of our licensee population at this point.
And a good portion of that 10,000 are fresh.
Right, and
But a good portion are aged. So, and that's where the issue comes in as to whether or not they're accurate.
it becomes a challenge, but I think that it carries the double-edged piece of that if people know that information is coming through email, that's available and that can be delivered through email, people actually might be more inclined to provide their email addresses and make sure that they're getting this updated information so that they can be more in tune to what this board is doing and what's the challenges that might be facing their license in the future. So I think that it has that benefit to them that people may be more inclined to provide their correct email addresses or their updated email addresses.
It's my intent moving forward to be as green and convenient as possible. So where I can cut printing costs, I will. So creating agenda materials for board members to allude and not have to have printed out agenda books is one of those things that we've looked at. But beyond that, I would definitely love to be able to provide electronic information to my licensees.
Jason, but the majority of the email addresses that you have, they are good email addresses, right?
At first guess, I would agree with you.
Okay,
But
because
I'm not really sure.
This would kind of be a missed opportunity.
Oh no, it will happen. We will do it. It won't be the first time that we did it. And that's, I guess, maybe that's the missing part of this conversation is speaking from experience. The last time that we attempted this, we received a huge portion of return, or what we call bounce back emails, undeliverable. And the problem with that is when you deliver those emails to large internet providers. So a lot of us in this room have an email address that ends in Gmail or ends in some kind of .edu or Yahoo or a Comcast or whatever your internet provider might be, or AOL even. AOL is a good example. So a lot of the aged emails I have are AOL. When I send those out in mass and they're returned back, the internet provider itself actually puts a block on anything I send because they see us as some kind of spam agency. So we have to be kind of aware of that in our strategy and delivery as well.
Maybe we should try a campaign that addresses that specifically in terms of, asking for, from our Facebook, from all the different social media platforms via a landing page or squeeze page for their email address, for their email to receive information from the board updates, that kind of thing. And I don't know what the legalities are with that, but that's one way to build that list out and get the most current email addresses.
We heard for email addresses for a very long time, and so we changed the address requirement and regulation to include email addresses. That was the first step of that campaign idea. And then from there, we included it in the correspondence links. It's on the applications now. So they have an opportunity to provide to us at any time we can. And when I talk about bolstering the content on our social media pages, Facebook and Twitter, with that kind of information, that's a kind of the valuable posts. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about doing, is saying, hey, if the board doesn't have your email address, here's the advantages that you can get out of giving it to us. We'll deliver this content direct to your email box. When there's a regulatory change, you'll get a notification of it and that kind of thing. So where I won't go as far as to say that we've levied a campaign, we are trying to change the culture of moving to that electronic communication.
You see, I just had a great idea because I was looking at not the study guide, but thinking that could be the campaign because this affects everyone.
Right.
And we could.
Hey, TJ, you're taking my thunder.
Oh. I spent too much time.
Right. As a point of strategy, that is the ultimate goal for this document. While it's in its first revision right now, as we make amendments to it, at some point there will be an ideal opportunity to try and use this as our first distribution through eBlast.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there yet because I got to change this for all the new regulations that are coming and that kind of thing. So, and whatever recommendations we get in feedback. So,
and that's where the twist comes in. You see, because we can sell it as such or not sell it, like present it as such a valued item that every physical therapist or physical therapist assistant would have to have one of these. And guess what? We are going to give you this one, this free deal. Just sign up for the email, and then we let that rest on the server, and then we have the most current one, and we deliver it via that email. I think this has presented more opportunity than just, being not a study guide.
So is that too optimistic to think that might, or something might happen by CPTA's conference?
if not CPTA's conference before the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good discussion. Any further discussion, comments from the board? Any public comment? Okay. Jason, do we want to move into agenda item number 10? Is it a good time for a break?
A 5 or 10 minute break, wouldn't mind.
Okay. Let's please do a 5-minute break so we can get back and continue to tackle the agenda. Okay, we're back on the record, and we will pick up with agenda item number 10 with Jason Kaiser.
Okay, so as members might remember, at the August 2016 meeting, this same topic was discussed, and it was we had a guest, Ricardo De La Cruz, who was the DCA personnel officer, came out and talked to the board about size and composition and ratio and that kind of thing. And from that, the board decided to ask DCA to assist with the help of DGS and request that, or the Office of Human Resources, I'm sorry, to work with the appropriate agencies in obtaining an exempt level increase for the board's executive.
Just a moment, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are we on number 10, agenda item 10? Are we on agenda item number 8?
Number 8.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did go to 8.
Were we going to wait for Christine to come back?
We could do that.
Okay, sorry about that.
So let me shift gears real quick.
Thank you.
So 10 is a little bit easier to discuss. It is the final outcome from the board's sunset review process. And attached, you'll see the board's 30-day response to the committee recommendations as crafted by the sunset subcommittee. Katerina Ellaby and Alicia Rubina Amen and myself, which was submitted 30 days after our hearing. It just speaks to each particular agenda item. the recommendation that the legislature's staff made and our response to that recommendation.
And did all the board members get a chance to look that over in the materials? Any comments or questions about that at all?
So do we hear back from them?
Yeah, so an update for today is we have been in constant contact with Vincent Shee, who is the analyst on the Assembly side, about progress and where things are moving on from here. And this touches on a little bit with Brooks' legislation report, but AB 1706 is the board sunset bill, and it has up to today, the language just basically extends the board. It just extends the date. We were in the same legislative language as the Occupational Therapy Board, and recently it was amended to also include the Chiropractic Board. So there were all three of us, but still, it's just to extend us into the future. We did have a bill,
1278.
AB 1278, that looked like it was going to be a placeholder for any of the things that we thought would be legislative changes, whether it be the retired status or extending our fee caps or any of those things. Unfortunately, that bill was gutted and amended and is now a contractor state licensing bill. Well, that leaves us in this kind of limbo area for a little while because we don't know where our proposed change language is going to land. And there has been a change in leadership on the Assembly side for the BNP committee. Chair Salas has been removed and Evan Lowe has now been replaced. And so there's a pleasure of the chair issue where some chairs would say, we're going to make this placeholder bill that just extends the dates and a separate bill to do any changes. That way, if the changes are controversial, you don't really sacrifice the extension of the board. Some chairs choose to do those things in combination where one bill addresses both and they risk it and they move it forward. And if something is controversial, that it doesn't make it through the Senate or it doesn't make it past the governor's desk, so be it. Well, we don't know which way that's going to go at this point. And in conversations with Vincent Shee at the Assembly, we probably won't, in line of being talked to with how busy they are, we probably won't have anybody kind of reach out to us to talk about changes until this bill makes it to the Senate. So once it makes it to the Senate, and it's in, for us at least, more comfortable and familiar ground with the Senate BNP committee and Bill Gage, we can start talking about where our language might end up, whether it be in an AB bill or a Senate bill, or if it goes in our existing AB 1706, being combined with the sunset date and whatever changes we're requesting.
So we'll wait.
We do. We wait, and we also reach out to the new chair of the Assembly, BNP, Evan Lowe, and see if we can garner some time with him and at least get his ear to talk about some of these things that we're really looking forward to changing in statute, and if he would consider including them in the 1706 language.
Any further board comment? Any public comment? Anything else to add to that item?
I think the only thing that I'd add to it was this being my second go-round at a sunset process. One was entirely different from the other. And while that created some anxiety, if you will, I'm sure you all picked up on it through this process when we were at our November meetings and those kind of things, that crafting the sunset report, while it was a tedious process, labor-intensive, what have you, the end product, the end result couldn't have gone better. Our presentation before the joint committee went so well, I think that it left us a little shell-shocked, and we went out into the hallway and thought, surely they're going to call us back in and ask us a question, or something. But it just speaks to the work of you as board members and staff as to how well that went off.
Yeah, it really does, because I remember the shell shock. I remember for a moment thinking, all that work for that? But then it's really a celebratory thing, yeah, so. All right, so.
I would just like to say, though, that had we not done all the work that we did, we likely would have been facing a lot more questions, and things would have been a lot more challenging once we got to hearing. So I think that the preparation, the behind-the-scenes work that we undertook, I think made a difference.
Paid off.
It made a huge difference.
If I could just add to that a little bit, I don't think that it's just the preparation in the report and those kind of things, the background work and the behind the scenes there. I really feel it's the entirety of the work. The dedication of this board, the dedication of the staff, the understanding of the mandate, and enforcing the idea of protection of the citizens of the state of California on a day-to-day basis that kind of carries through with all of us is really what carried us all the way through that process.
As well as guidance from council. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Lots of guidance.
Okay. How about picking up on agenda item 7? I'm sorry? Sorry? I'm sorry. Any further public comment? None. How about picking up on finishing agenda item 17 with FSBPT? Jason, shall we fill that in?
Sure. I do have an FSBPT update. I had a conversation with FSBPT the week before last regarding alternate pathway, which I think everyone knows I'm very much in favor of, and feel as though, as a contributor, that this is very much a California idea in having eligibility determined by the exam vendor to streamline the application process. Unfortunately, in the conversation with them, it seems as though because California cannot adhere to the eligibility requirements as imposed by FSBPT, meaning the 6-time lifetime ban, the 2 low score limit, the coursework tool 6 requirement, and the TOEFL requirement, which we will be in compliance with shortly. The FSBPT cannot at this time offer alternate pathway as a product to the state of California. And now that's where I end the update, because I have nothing further to add at that point. I don't have any insight as to what we do moving forward. I don't know that there will be any kind of negotiations. I think you've heard FSBPT's concerns in the past regarding the eligibility requirements and the statutory conflicts in California, that we would essentially have to change legislation for not just us, but possibly the entirety of the General Business and Professions Code when it comes to examinations, to be able to adhere to their eligibility requirements, which is a difficult task. So it's a different mindset or a different culture than in California. I mean, everyone that applies for licensure in California that is not successful will always be able to redeem themselves with the way that the current law is written. Always be able to remediate themselves, always be able to move forward, have that 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 17th, 18th chance, however long it might take. So we are at a crossroads, and as a result, staff and I have gone back to the drawing table to look at what the application process looks like in consideration of this new change, to see if there are any other methods that we can use to speed up the process in lieu of it. So once we have something better prepared, we'll present that to the board at a later date.
So just so I'm clear in my thinking then, applicants, if the alternate pathway is just taken off the table, then it would just be the traditional way where PTBC determines eligibility.
Correct.
Any further comment from the board?
I just had a quick question. So do our academic institutions know about this?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. But I can tell you that all the work that was done into creating Alternative Pathway, meaning CAPTE's involvement with FSPPT and requiring the schools to create a database or a interface, if you will, to FSPPT, still exists. All of that, all of the infrastructure for this program is built and is up and running. So the schools in California are reporting their cohorts in the beginning of that cohort to FSPPT, creating accounts individually for each person. And then those students, really, getting close to graduation, is their responsibility to then take that account and continue and move on from there. Unless they, according to FSPPT's own rules, unless they are registered with the Federation, and to register with the Federation at that point, the school has to have told FSPPT that they are at least a candidate within the 90-day window or a graduate before they can even register for the exam. So that kind of leads to my point. The infrastructure for this alternate pathway idea is already built. It's already up and running. Some states, Texas being one I know, are actually utilizing alternate pathway right now. And for just a little bit of background, when you move that eligibility approval from the jurisdiction to the administrator of the examination, there are some efficiencies that are realized. One of which is the person can actually go and take the exam as many times as they need to pass before they even apply with the jurisdiction. And so if you just kind of think about that for a second, with the load of applications that California receives on a monthly basis, and how many of them might take 1 or 2 attempts, and how that fixed date calendar also plays in at that point. I might have an application in our desks for 3 to 4, even 9 months before we can make a determination based on passage of the MPTE, whether licensure is appropriate. If they can do all of that before they even come to me, the whole application process changes from that 3, 6, 9 month idea to 3 to 6 weeks, start to finish. So it's very much something that I think California would like to do, but until we can resolve the issue with the eligibility requirements that FSPPT is imposing, we are at a crossroads.
Any further board comment? Any public comment? Okay. I recently went to a Foreign Educated Standards meeting with FSBPT and let their staff know that we do have a placeholder on our agenda for FSBPT, but that we usually don't have a representative come out. And she encouraged me, Leslie Adrian encouraged me and all of us, whenever we have information to share that we've learned from FSBPT, to go ahead and share that at our board meetings. And so some of you have gone to board member training, or if anyone goes to a conference or any other thing and you learn something that you'd like to share, I think it would be beneficial to all the board members to hear about that. So as far as the Foreign Educated Standards Committee is concerned, there really isn't any new news right now other than to kind of get the information out about some of the products that they've already been working on in the last couple of years, like the performance examination tool for supervised practice for foreign educated students, those sorts of things. And Jason, I really appreciate your involvement with FSBPT because you're our main portal for information at these board meetings. So if there's anything else that you'd like to share that
Sure.
you can.
2 things. One is I serve on the Continuing Competency Committee for the Federation, and the thing that they're looking at right now is how well continuing competency models have worked across the United States, and whether or not we are measuring competence, or we should be measuring engagement and outcomes, or professional development and that kind of thing. So really taking a cold, hard look at the systems that we put in place. FSBPT provided a model, a continuing competence model, which while California's continuing competency model doesn't mirror it, it's probably the closest to the federations in the United States, meaning that while we might not have it verbatim, we have just about every component, 90% of it, the same. So, and continuing competency in California has worked very well as a system. What FSBPT is looking at now is its necessity and if it's actually doing the job that they're looking for in assessing competence. So, we're really as a committee looking at that on a much more high level perspective, and trying to take those concepts and try to make them fit with the statistics that we're gathering from all of the different states as far as audits and approvals and that kind of thing. So the second thing that I'm curious to hear is I know that a few of you have attended the board member and administrator training for FSBPT, which they're now renaming to just regulatory training. And how valuable was that training for you as a newly appointed board member? And if it just kind of rehash some of the things that you learned in DCA's board member orientation training, or did it have different topics? I've attended it. It actually, I would say, probably structured a good portion of my thinking in becoming an administrator. As a representative of California, but also as a citizen of the state. So it gave me a new appreciation as to what this mandate is really about in consumer protection, and if for Star Trek fans, like a prime directive, and where all thinking should stem from. So I encourage all of my members to attend it, and I've even approached FSBPT to try and see if we can all do it at one time, because I think it's one of those experiences that could be valuable as a group. But I'd like to hear feedback online or offline about how your experiences were with that training.
Dr. Drummer and I will let you know.
Yeah.
We're slated to go out early June.
Yep.
And can you speak about the compact a little bit?
I can. A point of news, I guess, for California is if you're familiar with FSBPT's licensure compact, there was a looming kind of requirement that the compact wouldn't actually exist until 10 jurisdictions joined it. And last month, the 10th jurisdiction joined it. So the compact is now officially formed. And will be put together shortly. So what they're going to be doing now is promulgating regulations, and those 10 boards will have say into what those regulations look like. There are some backbone structure of the compact that's already in existence, some agreements that were made ahead of time, essentially taking the highest standard or best practice from one jurisdiction and applying it. And to a certain extent, a lot of those best practices are California's. So a fingerprint background check, continuing competency credits at 30 hours or 30 units, things like that. In the United States right now, there's only about 18 to 19 boards that actually do a criminal background check. And out of those 19, only about 8 of them do a fingerprint-based background check. So for those states to join into the compact, they will now have to come up to the same level as the highest standard, which is what California holds, which is a fingerprint-based background check. We're looking at the idea of having FSBPT come out to the August meeting and do a presentation on the compact to kind of talk about the pros and the cons and why we might consider it, and even the con of not being part of the first 10 states, because we wouldn't have any say into the promulgation and regulation because we weren't part of the first 10. So I have yet to get a response back as to whether or not they'll be able to attend, but that's the idea.
Thank you.
Jason, just considering the potential legislative hurdles that would be required for us to join the compact, that alone seems to me like this might not be terribly realistic for the state, for us to consider.
Yeah, if this profession considered joining the compact, you wouldn't be the first healthcare profession to kind of go down that road. So physicians and registered nurses have tried it in California in the past to no avail. And that's where it was stalled or held, was in the legislature. So the essential key really being necessity. We're really going to have to prove to a certain extent to the legislature that there is a definite necessity of access issues, because that's essentially the consumer side of it. Is if there's limited access to practitioners, then that's a consideration that a regulatory board should make in moving towards a compact agreement. Until we have statistics that show in California that we have access issues, that's a difficult argument to make. There are some states that's a very easy argument to make. As big as California is, per capita per square mile, we still have a pretty high ratio of PTs to population compared to other states. So it makes it a kind of a difficult argument. Our border states, which is the other consideration for a compact, is so that they can cross borders. Oregon is a very sparse area, and so having Oregon licensees come into California, there isn't a whole lot of population to be served there from that. And then for Nevada's sake, the border of Nevada to California, there aren't a whole lot of PTs in Nevada to support that idea either. So there are some hurdles to get over.
And the argument that dual licensure in multiple states can occur and does occur, and really addresses the border state issue, has addressed the border state issue for forever. And so getting past that point as well.
The argument there would be that it's redundant, and it's a burden on the licensee to have to pay multiple renewal fees and have to be held to multiple continuing competency requirements from one state to another and those kind of things. But the licensure compact could address those issues for the licensee themselves. But you have to ask yourself at that point, is that really a consumer protection issue? Or are we still focusing on access to care? It's a little further complicated when you take into consideration from a regulatory perspective, administratively, how you would keep track of who is where and what recourse and what you could do. The compact for me sometimes is a bit of a Pandora's box, or going down the rabbit hole. Once I go down, I could be down there for hours imagining all the different things that might happen. And then when I get back to the surface, I'm dizzy and I need to go to sleep for a couple of days.
Good questions. Any further comment or questions from the board regarding any FSBPT issues?
Yeah, I'm open to sharing some of my experiences with you, Jason, about what the differences were between going to the FSBPT and then doing the DCA training. So I'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
Also, with regard to the compact, when they were presenting that to us last year, again, it is presented in a very, compelling manner. But when you look closer to it, within the realities of California, I found it less applicable. So I didn't feel like there needed to be a rush towards it, even though it starts feeling more attractive when you can be part of the first 10 and kind of guide how things are going to go. But guiding something that is going to go for the rest of it is not really relevant if you have all the necessary requirements, like we have in California right now, in place to address most of the issues with regard to public protection. The minute I steer a little bit, I felt like the minute I was moving my seat a little bit over to looking for efficiencies, I could totally see it their way. And it's not a bad thing. I like the efficiencies, but I just felt like I was kind of, without realizing, being shifted by the tide over to the commercial side of it, and less to the public protection. And I don't because the mandate is public protection, I kind of sit for myself in the public protection domain and say, okay, let's take it from here, and then observe. So I think that's how I see the compact specifically. That's my comment.
Thank you, DJ. We gotta wear our hat
Yes.
when we're here. Yeah. Okay, any other further board comment? Any public comment? All right. And how do you feel about tackling agenda item number 11, board member training, Jason?
I'll need about 5 minutes to set up, and I'll ask you to step out into the audience. We're going to drop a screen and play a presentation for you.
Okay, let's do that.
Again, I'd like to welcome you to today's Clear Introduction to Regulatory Governance webinar. Today's module is Roles and Responsibilities of a Board Member. Thank you so much for participating today. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker. Jan Robinson is currently the Registrar and Chief Executive Officer of the College of Veterinarians of Ontario, a position she began in 2011. A recognized leader in the field of profession-based regulation, Jan has more than 20 years of experience providing vision and direction to regulatory and public policy organizations. She is recognized as a keen strategist with the ability to build partnerships and engagement at the provincial, national, and international levels. As Registrar for a regulatory college, Jan values the opportunity to serve the public interest. Her position enables her to bring innovative approaches to the delivery of regulatory programs. Key contributions throughout her career include development of a framework to establish governance excellence, improving the integration of internationally educated professionals into practice, introducing an accountability measurement approach to regulation, and leading legislative change that promotes public access and safety. Jan's current interests include the global mobility of professionals, developing cultures that support quality outcomes, and promoting agile legislative and standard-setting frameworks. With that, I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Jan Robinson. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie, very much. Welcome, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon with you. It's always a privilege to have the opportunity to present to my fellow colleagues at CLEAR and to also listen to the questions and answers, or the questions, I guess, that come up in relationship to these sorts of topics on governance. As Stephanie said, this is the second part, actually, in the series on Introduction to Regulatory Governance, and our focus this afternoon is on roles and responsibilities. I am going to start off by saying that, there's a broad array of experience that we'll have tuned in today, some with less experience, some with a great deal. And this is really intended as a review of the basics, and perhaps, some tips to consider along the way. But all of us, I would say, can use a refresher and go back to our roots related to this important area. There are three key elements to begin with in this section, and the very first that I want to start with is that regulatory organizations are public organizations. It's really important in terms of the optics on how we define what we're doing to consider that in public organizations we're entrusted to a profession. Often our regulatory organizations are viewed as professional interest organizations working within the realm of the occupation. And this can be quite confusing. And so we really need to stop and consider our true role as an organization for public protection that's been entrusted. So it's a privilege. System self-regulation is a privilege. And it is an instrument of government, and it can be taken away. And certainly in Ontario, here in Canada, there have been challenges in this regard. We know in the United States, there are sunset provisions that come into play and call into question whether or not a regulatory organization should continue to exist and what its obligations should continue to be. And we've seen, similar strengths of this dialogue in the United Kingdom and Australia. And certainly in the last 5 years, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, has written quite a bit about regulatory effects. Another key element in this conversation is protecting the public interest, which is really the foundation of regulation. And although you would know this and you would have heard about this in other sections of the training, it bears repeating. What we're really discussing here is our mandate and our mission. The conversation needs to be about what it is we are responsible for and how we ensure that we're doing it well. And although there may be more than 3 legs to the stool around this conversation, depending upon the roles we're granted through statute, there are at least 3 primary ones that cross over, and that I think, regardless of our jurisdiction. So the first is that we have a responsibility related to entry of practice, or how I might say it colloquially, who gets in. Second, we have a responsibility to professional conduct during investigations or reviews and discipline. So who should be limited or who shouldn't be in, so to speak. And finally, is a question of continuing competency and quality assurance and how we ensure that individuals stay current or stay practicing. So in the event that we aren't doing any of those things well, the question would then come back to, where are we in protecting the public interest related to the profession? Protecting the public interest is very much linked to the concept of reputation, and in the event that we stray from our mandate, it can be very hard to recover. And our job, for sure, is about managing risk. And the last message that is fundamental to this presentation is that governance is governance is governance. And generally what this means is that whether it's corporate, public, or not-for-profit, when we're talking in terms of a governing role, governance is governance, and that's what we're going to begin to explore. When we're thinking about the principal job of a board member or a governor, so I'm using those words interchangeably. I know for some, the word governor may seem more unusual. It's really about adding value. When you leave a board or a council meeting, or you finish your mandate or term, can you consider that you actually added value to your organization? Adding value can mean setting strategic direction for the organization, or being concerned about the organization's well-being, including its staffing and its policies. Of course, being concerned about its financial health. Ensuring that it's doing a quality job, both in perception and in offering quality products. And last but not least, ensuring the organization has a high-performing CEO that's assisting and partnering with the board in terms of its work. So in adding value in this way, one of the key responsibilities or key behaviors of an engaged board member is asking probing questions. Now, this can sometimes be challenging for staff, but this is exactly what a good governor or board member is doing. Asking questions of other board members, of the president, of the CEO, and they can be doing this particular thing really well. One of the tricks of the trade that I often talk about is making sure that those questions also stay within the boundaries of the role of a board member. One of the ways to describe this is, as a board member, am I considering the why or the what question? So, why are we doing that, or what are we doing? As opposed to questions that talk about how, which are operational in focus. So asking what and why question is related to the work of the board, and this is a really key behavior of an engaged governor. Responsibilities can also be bucketed into three primary areas known as care, loyalty, and, strangely enough, obedience. You'll often see these referred to as duties, which increase that manner of responsibility to a governor. When we talk about duty of care, what we're really talking about here is accountability. What are we accountable for as a board? We're accountable to be diligent and to act with due diligence around the things that are mandated by our enabling legislation. We also need to place due diligence on finance and what are the checks and balances that will let us know that we're on target related to our outcomes and goals. The second is the duty of loyalty. And this is really about direction or alignment and the question of, are your interests in the best interest of the organization? Do you have the public interest in mind? Can and do you set your hat at the door related to your personal interests when you enter into that boardroom? So loyalty addresses such things as conflict of interest and the ability of the board to speak with one voice and striving to achieve a decision. And lastly is the third one, obedience. And this is really about the rules and the unity of command. Are you obeying, the rules as a board member? The rules may come across in many different forms. It could be in bylaws, it could be rules of order. Sometimes they're governance policies, and in a best practice environment, you're going to have a code of conduct. And I'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Now, an important question is, who is a board member responsible to? There's a book, and it's been around for a while actually, called The Imperfect Board Member. The Imperfect Board Member, and it's written by Jim Brown. And it's an excellent resource, actually, for both staff and board members to discuss who board members are really responsible to in their various activities. So in our role as regulators, the principal individuals or individual that we're responsible to is the public through government. And in many ways, this can be described as the public being our owners. Very often, because our licensees or registrants are our funders, we place the emphasis in the direction of the licensee as our owner, when in fact, our mandates come from government. So we're an instrument of government, as we said earlier, and therefore the public is our primary or principal owner, to whom we are the most responsible. So what does the public expect? And expect is an interesting word used here as well. I've heard some interesting contradiction to the use of that term to really say, what does the public assume as opposed to expect, because probably it's more assumption on that level. But they do expect that qualified and competent members, licensees, so we're assuring them that the licensees are qualified. They expect fairness whenever they deal with us. They expect transparency. They want to know and understand what we're about, and they expect to glean or get knowledge from us in terms of our role as the interface. And what about the licensee or even the potential licensee? What is the board member's responsibility to them? What's really important about our relationship as a board with the licensee is their engagement with us. So how is our communication, and is it two-way, and are we understood? We also have a fiduciary responsibility to the individual registrant as they pay the fees. And although they're not our owners in terms of who we're mandated to protect, we are responsible in terms of ensuring that we're accountable for those funds received and that we use them wisely. We're also responsible for fairness and transparency, and licensees expect fair, objective, and impartial dealings with the regulatory agency. And finally, they expect information. So education and information is provided that assists an individual in understanding, again, their interactions with us. And last but not least, we also need to look at our responsibilities of a board member to the other members of the board and the staff. So what might that look like? Well, specifics might vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but perhaps it might be a list like this. to listen and to participate, to do the work we say we're going to do, to foster really great working relationships, and last but not least, as we said earlier, to ask questions in order to help make good decisions. So earlier I mentioned the whole concept of code of conduct, which can often be a common element of board policy. Codes of conduct are the internal rules or behaviors relating to the culture of the organization. They dictate the general attitudes and beliefs of this particular group and how board members are supposed to act. In good times, codes of conduct are there and they don't need a lot of referencing. But I can assure you, in difficult times, they're extremely important to have so that the group can come back and identify how they've deviated from the standard or the culture as intended. So it creates a great anchor, if you will. The common themes that one would see in a code of conduct would include such things as an individual needs to be knowledgeable, so you need to be informed, you need to read your material or your package, and you need to prepare effectively for meetings. You need to respect confidentiality. You need to declare conflict of interest or an apprehension of bias in a particular matter if you have one. You need to ask questions. There it is again, although this has got to be caveated around it respectfully. You need to listen to others and be objective in terms of considering the decisions before you. And you need to attend. That seems kind of obvious, but sometimes this can be a real issue. But board service is about commitment and involvement. And you need to speak with one voice. You need to stay out of operations. And this goes back to the previous discussion regarding how you stay on the why and the what questions. And knowing that if you're getting into the how, you move into the operation side of the equation, which really is intended for staff to handle. And finally, the last point here is accept nothing less. And what this really means is that if you've got a code of conduct and you're setting a culture, you will accept nothing less from one another and keep each other honest in that regard. So something that's been mentioned a couple of times as well is this concept of speaking with one voice. And this can sometimes be a real challenge because it's absolutely critical that you set your hat at the door, setting aside your own personal interests. So this means coming to the interests of the organization first and ensuring the board is concerned with the whole and the mandate of the organization as opposed to one particular constituency, for example. Therefore, although there may be heated debates and maybe some real tension relating to certain board discussions, at the end of the day, the decision of the board has been made and it must be carried out consistently by each board member. Board members must accept that a respectful debate has been had and the decision has been made and they're not at liberty to publicly question or go against the decision. You didn't even see these slides anyway. And this can be really hard, as I said earlier, because passions are often involved. So a corollary to the concept of speaking with one voice can also be the concept of what to do with a disruptive member. This speaks again to the concept that board members should accept nothing less in a relationship, to the code of conduct. This is always an area that's very challenging for boards because it's difficult to call one another to task on behaviors that are unbecoming or behaviors that aren't constructive to the board. And some of these, and you may have seen some of these behaviors, they can look like individuals speaking over one another, swearing, raising a voice, pounding a fist on the desk, what I call bathroom politics. Or basically call around, before a board meeting where tending to bring factions together, interfering with the staff. So there's lots of behaviors that can be quite disruptive. And the key to really managing a difficult board member is just to be honest and know that everyone that is there usually trying to do their best. And consequently, the best course of action is really just to name the behavior, whatever the issue is, manage it, censure it, and move on. So, again, codes of conduct and sanctioning processes are really fundamental to help keep in alignment. As we sort of shift to discussing high-performing organizations, again, the word I just used is key to this. One is the key factors is alignment. So high-performing organizations have great alignment. Everyone gets where the organization is headed, and they understand the mandate. They know what the outcomes are, and there are some tactics against those outcomes. And alignment can often be described as follows. What you have is a high-performing organization with they'll have one aligned board. They're going to have one CEO, and they are not involved in hiring, firing, and employment of staff. They work through the one staff person, and they leave the operational details to that CEO. They're going to have one vision, and they're going to have one voice. And the operative word here that you can see all the way along is the word one. And again, it comes back to alignment and being clear about where the organization is headed. So the concept of one CEO or staff person can sometimes, for certain boards, seem unusual. It often depends on the organizational model, and sometimes the regulatory model drags governing boards into areas that they perhaps wouldn't fall into otherwise. So sometimes it's the model that's the problem, not necessarily the people. So let me give you an example. Committees and committee models. So where you have a regulatory organization that has a variety of committees, maybe some of them are creatures of statute, it takes things one layer lower than board decision making and increases the involvement directly with individual staff. And it can create confusion in terms of to whom the staff members report. And they may muddle the ideal structure of the board or council selecting the CEO and the CEO being responsible for the direction of all additional staff members. An example might be where a committee chair decides that there might be some really interesting research in a particular area, not entirely related to the mandate of the committee, so they decide to ask the staff person assigned to their committee to pursue that research. Well, that really isn't the purview of that particular chair. That chair's role is to facilitate the work of the committee on behalf of the board. The staff person is to assist in that direction given by the board, but any unrelated activity should be under the direction of the CEO. So it's really important for board or council members to remember is that they hire a CEO, and that CEO is the main staff person who's accountable to them. So let's take a little look here at conflicts of interest. You can probably come up with examples you've bumped into yourself over the years. But a common example in regulatory organizations is that you have a partnership or a working relationship with an individual who's applying for an open contract with the board or college. Another example might be you're an academic representative on a particular board sitting on the entry and practice panel or the licensure panel, and one of your students or advisees comes under question. Or another example would be that somebody you work with comes through the discipline process while you sit on or oversee disciplinary hearings. Some of the more obvious examples come in where a board or council member has some sort of financial interest in an issue the board is considering. So conflicts of interest, though rare, do arise, and some professions with a smaller pool of practitioners may see them arise more frequently. And when they do, it's really essential that they're handled and managed appropriately. So what would be best interest or best practices, I should say, in this particular area? So the first thing would be to have a policy related to conflicts of interest. The second would be to know the policy. And some of the best strategies for dealing with potential conflicts involve having the knowledge, knowing the plan, what he's working with the plan, and keeping it forefront so that people are clear about it. Generally, what you're going to see in conflict of interest policy is that individuals need to begin by declaring their potential conflict. People can seek advice privately, perhaps from the president, chair of the board, perhaps from the CEO or a chair of the committee. And when they're making a declaration, they're not really providing full information, they're simply declaring. And any specifics about the relationship will only be discussed in those private circumstances where they were getting advice. So once the conflict has been declared, best practices would say that the individual should leave the room. Now, some organizations have determined that as long as the individual takes no part in the discussion, they can remain at the table. However, I would suggest to you that this really still creates a presence in the discussion that would best be avoided entirely. What you're able to do when they leave the room is note that the person left the room in your minutes, and it assists in your accountability related to the final decision. So it is best to have understanding on the content of the policy related to conflicts of interest. To educate the board or council members about it, and finally enforce it. The other question is how to get people to declare their conflict when they do have one, which is about honesty. And this comes back to the values of the organization, the culture of the organization. And it's about ongoing orientation and stressing the importance of consistency. Because the fundamental nature of the reason for doing all of these things is avoiding the Achilles heel of regulatory bodies. I'm going to speak about that in a minute. But I just also wanted to add that one of the interesting practices that is out there in more and more is actually having board members sign off annual conflict of interest declarations so that it stays front and center each year. The same as signing off a confidentiality declaration each year so that the individuals are reminded again about their confidentiality responsibilities. And this, both of these become central to this concept of the regulator's Achilles heel. And this is a great discussion to have with fellow board members outside of the meeting and more in a roundtable format. You know, what are the kinds of conflicts of interest or even breaches of confidentiality that cause the Achilles heel of an organization? And what that means is that a decision was made in bad faith. This is not common for regulatory organizations. So partly that's because we're a creature of statute, and often, not always, the legislation will indemnify that most of the decisions made by a regulator are made in good faith. Insurance, of course, assists with this. And the majority of court cases, the courts tend to uphold decisions by a regulatory body based on the statutory elements or nature of why they were created. Rulings and reviews, however, never come out in favor of the board if there is any evidence at all that it's related to undeclared conflicts of interest or a confidentiality breach. As I was saying, this is really the Achilles heel area of regulatory organizations. Board members need to be made aware of the kinds of concerns that an organization would see if someone didn't declare a conflict of interest and what it would mean for the organization's reputation. It is very important that each member understands in a very practical way what decisions in bad faith mean to an organization entrusted with public interest. So you want to ensure that confidentiality and conflict of interest are included in your code of conduct. You would also want to have opportunities for sanctions and consequences for a board member's intentional failure to disclose conflict of interest. And all of these will help you avoid decisions in bad faith and maintain the reputation of the organization. Let's move to something just a little bit different. Let's talk about public information. So when you're looking at what is public, you'll probably find that just about everything you do as a board or council member is part of the public record. Obviously, the laws are, and the decisions we take under statute, except for individual member decisions are. And governance generally is as well. while laws vary around us by jurisdiction, generally most meetings are open to the public and proceed in that fashion. And there's really increasing public pressure for transparency in public organizations. The decreasing opportunity also exists to go in camera or into executive session meetings because of the desire and this demand for increased public accountability. Generally, there are two things that fall here, and even these are limited compared to the past. So staff decisions and very sensitive discipline issues or discussions, if they reach the board level, are obvious pieces that can go in camera. On occasion, legal advice can be given in camera, but even those circumstances are really decreasing in terms of their availability to be used in that way. And when you do go into camera, it's really important that you indicate in the minutes what the name of the topic was that you went in camera for, and that when you come out of camera that you give a snapshot of the results of your in-camera discussion. So that is on the record. There are very interesting pressures, that are moving us towards increased public disclosure, and I know many of you are going to be familiar with this because we're seeing it in the papers increasingly as well. So I'm anticipating that this will continue to be an evolving area and probably push us to think about things quite differently as the years move forward and keep us in a place of somewhat of discomfort, I suspect. So what are the benefits of an informed public, and what are the benefits of transparency and providing information to the public? First, it leads to increasing the public confidence and increasing their trust, which is invaluable for regulatory authorities. An informed public increases the enablement of members of the public to exercise their rights and ensure quality of service. It also results in increased knowledge of the role of regulatory organizations, our accountability, and how regulatory organizations strive for excellence. In terms of the benefits of an informed profession, they become a little more tangible, really, than the ones for the public. Obviously, you're going to have a group that hopefully knows the rules. You're going to have a group that's able to integrate the standards into practice, which is what we all want, and benefit for everyone. You may be able to help decrease confusion between the roles of regulatory organizations and professional associations. So I can say after 25 years in business, there still seems to be something that's rampant out there. And you hopefully will also increase engagement in policy making. The North American regulatory model is one that relies on the profession to be engaged in self-regulation. As an informed profession, generally can become increasingly engaged in rules, decisions, and development of activities within the regulatory community. And last but not least, building and maintaining strong relationships with other stakeholders. These stakeholders might be patients, potential consumers, government, academia, even other professions. So ultimately, this is about having a governing voice that has an influence. And as a board member and governor, tending to stakeholder relationships and thinking hard about the strategic fit of each stakeholder into the policy direction of the organization, and it can be really key to progress. Now, this is not a communications presentation. It's really too big a topic to be covered here fully. But communication to audience is very dependent, and it's issue dependent and it's strategy dependent. And as you're very well aware, there are multiple vehicles for communication, and they're all attached to dollars and resources. So whether it's our annual report, our website, a newsletter, a brochure, something in the media, face-to-face communication, they're just going to be continually evolving. And I know many of us have stepped out into social media, some of us more than others, utilizing LinkedIn, Twitter, Google+, etc. And starting to see as well individuals moving into live streaming of board meetings or portions of board meetings. So these methods will forever thus, be in this direction. But we're really thinking hard on what are the right communication tools to create the right dialogue, the right informed commitment to what it is we're putting out in place, so that we can really make a difference to the work that we're doing. And so it is, again, really thinking strategically about which specific tools are going to achieve what we want them to achieve. And this conversation, talking about communication as a whole, not so much the specifics, but the whole, is pretty critically important at the board level as well. So we'll begin to close this particular module by discussing the evaluation of board performance. If you're at all focused on governance excellence, then you need to strive for continual improvement. And if you are a regulatory organization with a mandate to look at continuous improvement of the profession, it becomes even more important to reflect that behavior internally as well. Across the spectrum of governing organizations, there's a wide range of options that are being discussed related to meeting evaluation. The two most common are annual board evaluation and self-evaluation. Although certainly the literature, just as says about professions, would generally say we're not very good at it, self-evaluation can be quite helpful. But peer evaluation is another, and that presents its own challenges, particularly when you're dealing with volunteers who are not keen to be commented on by their colleagues. I think that one of the, if I was to add a little bit to this, I would say that in my experience, I've utilized long, short, and annual, every meeting, different kinds of ways to get at evaluation. In the last couple of years, what I'm really coming down to is the fact that one longer board evaluation a year, perhaps known as not known as an annual board evaluation, but a much more in-depth evaluation is really useful, and that short 2 or 3 targeted question areas at every board meeting opportunity it can be really quite effective at getting a sense of where alignment needs to happen and extracting those comments and using them. Measuring and reporting. Now, this is interesting because although I would say I've been in regulatory circles talking about this for the last 10 years anyway, we're still very much in the beginning stages of what we'll call the art and the science of performance measurement or regulatory effectiveness. And even in looking at the literature in this area, there's a lot written over the last 20 years on regulatory effectiveness of different regulators, not certainly just ours. But it's very circular, and it very much demonstrates that although we talk about it, it's difficult for us to figure out how to move forward on it. So this really is about looking at what would be the indicators of our success. What are the indicators that would tell the public that we're meeting our mandate? What are the indicators that would explain to the government that we're responsible and accountable for our role that's been vested in us? Some organizations utilize something similar to a balanced scorecard. That is something that I will use here. Others use other kinds of mechanisms like key performance indicators. I would tend to say, though, that the majority of those indicators are internally looking as opposed to outwardly looking. But whatever it is that we're measuring at a board level, it needs to be linked with the concept of public reporting. We need to answer the following questions for ourselves, but we also need to communicate the responses to our stakeholders. So what do those indicators tell us? What is things are doing well? What are the tough things that they're telling us? Where are their gaps? What are we going to do about them? And so how do we start to be transparent out the good, the bad, the areas that need improvement. But this kind of reporting can really strengthen our integrity by, again, focusing on honesty and the fact that we're making some strides, but we also have areas for improvement. This is to be expected. These are the kinds of conversations that build confidence in our role amongst the various stakeholders that we talked about before, amongst our owners, the public, amongst licensees, and amongst the various stakeholders that we're engaged with. So just in summary, ultimately, we're responsible to many people and a wide range of stakeholders. Boards are about governance. They're not about operations. They're about the what and the why, not the how of how the business runs. It's a partner leadership. It's a partnership with the CEO and the board, as well as partners in leadership across the profession. This partnership must also include all the various groups that help us to accomplish the kind of regulatory influence that's important in today's society. Finally, we're about building public trust around the mandate that's been given through statute. These are all the really important roles that each board member must understand in order for a regulatory organization to function at its greatest capacity. So thanks very much, and maybe, Stephanie, we can open it up and see if there are any questions.
All right, great. Well, thank you. And again, popped up. Someone saying, what do you think is the optimum number of years of membership or service on a board?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. You know, it's funny. I was in a breakfast meeting today, and that conversation came up. And I think that there are different elements of that, too. So, in the organizations that I've been in, the majority of individuals on the board have had 3-year terms, renewable once. And that's included both our public appointees as well as our elected members. That actually serves to provide a fair amount of stability and yet some changeover that's happening and bringing new voice to the table, which is always healthy as well. I have heard greater stagnation, if I hesitate to use that word, but greater stagnation of a group in terms of new voice when those terms tend to be upwards of 9, 10, 11, 12 years of opportunity, or where they are open-ended. So I think to that question, I would say I do think that that requires lots of really good consideration and due diligence in terms of allowing the organization to advance, and I do think it should be. I do think there should be terms and there should be a limit on them. And I think that it's the same for the important officer role within an organization as well. So, for example, the role of the president. So, should an individual be in that position for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? Does that bring stability to an organization, or does it in fact hold captive the role? And you know, those are debates, right? Because what you want to have is a really good relationship, a really strong president and a really strong CEO, and have that to be a really great relationship. And leave it to the democracy of the table to appoint or elect their officer. But I think these are great debates for boards to have and to utilize the experiences of other boards with varied terms to help influence that. It's very difficult to examine that all internally, like within your own board, without that kind of external input that isn't necessarily coming from staff, because staff may have a bias about that one way or the other. But other organizations will have very good input to this. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Just it's a very interesting question, not an easy one.
All right, thank you. We've had another question asking what staff, if any, should be present in board meetings, both for public and in camera.
Okay. That's a great question. So what I can do is I can give you my, it's just my opinion and my thinking on it in terms of the public meeting, and then I'll talk about in-camera in a minute. So I actually invite all my senior and my middle management staff to our council meetings, and my expectation is that they are in attendance for the whole meeting. And the reason for that is because the decisions of the board, let's take a policy decisions of the board, need to be implemented at the staff level. When staff just receive the end product of that, they don't necessarily understand the context or the debate or how we got to those decisions. So I find it really invaluable to have, as I've already said, my senior and middle managers or program leads, let's call them that, listening to the debate, and I expect attendance. In terms of in-camera, that is really dependent on the subject matter. So, for example, we don't go in camera here very often. Actually, to be quite honest, the only thing that goes in camera is the registrar's performance review. And I do not sit in on that discussion. So in that situation, that is the board in and of itself. If the board goes in camera on anything else, generally they invite the CEO to be in attendance at that. Otherwise, they're having closed meetings without a CEO tells me that the relationship between the board and the CEO has been challenged. Because you wouldn't want your senior leader who would be executing decisions related to what came out of an in-camera session not to be understanding what the debate and the dialogue is at the council table. So I think that to not include a CEO in in-camera meetings other than their performance review is a demonstration of a leadership breakdown, leadership partnership breakdown. Whether or not you include others other staff in an in-camera meeting, I think would be very much dependent on whether they had information about the issue that would be helpful for the board to understand. But my experience is that it's not very often that you invite too many others. Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you. We have another question saying, who should be setting the agenda for board meetings, the chair or the CEO?
I think that that's a joint partnership because staff is driving the policy work of council or a board forward, and they're going to, the CEO should have a pretty good sense of what's going to be able to be well prepared to hit a particular agenda. That would not be the purview or the understanding of the president or the chair of the board. So I see that as a joint discussion. Those are constantly evolving, but I see that as joint. I don't see it as more.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think that has covered the questions that have come in, so thank you for those. I think then we'll be ready to close out for today then. CLEAR would like to thank our presenter today and thank all of you for participating in this CLEAR Board Member Training webinar. We hope you enjoyed this presentation.
All right. All right, you guys can come back behind the dais. You want to take a little break?
Yeah, can we take 5 minutes and come right back?
Do you think we need to